Okay, I'm going to walk you through a problem where you have to find the probability and using your formula by hand. So bear with me, we're going to get through these. I worked these really fast so I could go back and explain them. So hopefully this will help you work these by hand. So the first one we're going to do is, we know P is 0.35. Okay, that's the probability. And N is 7. We want the probability that X equals 3. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to do that step by step if you wanted to do it by hand. Okay, so let's look at it. I'm going to make it really small so hopefully we can get everything on this slide. So we know that, let me make sure I'm on the right one. We know that N is 7, P is 0.35, and we want X to be 3. So now, I had to make sure I was on the right problem. Sorry about that. Alright, so we know that N is 7. We know that for this first part, X is going to equal 3, and the probability of it occurring is 0.35. Okay, so if the probability of the success is 0.35, let's say that Q is always the 1 minus that. So the P and Q, your P's and Q's have to add up to 1. So that's 0.65. So the probability of 3. So we know our formula is n factorial over n minus x factorial over x factorial. And you may start to do this without having to write this and just understand where everything goes. Okay, so we know that n is 7, and then we would do 7 minus, and x is 3 in part A. And the probability of its success is 0.35, and we know that we want x to be 3. And then the probability of Q, or the failure, is 0.65. Now, we know that their n is 7, so what needs to go here to make 3 plus what is 7? 3 plus 4 is 7. So this will always, these numbers will always add up to n. So now let's look at and see what we can cancel out. We know on the bottom we would have 7 times 6 times 5 times 4. We would need to get to 4 because on the bottom 7 minus 3 is 4. So that would cancel out. Then you have the 3 factorial. So 3 times 2 times 1. So if you did that, you would get 7 times 6 is 42 times 5 is 210. And then 210 divided by 6, put that in your calculator, and you would get 35. So I went ahead and simplified all that. So now in your calculator, you're going to do 35 times 0.35 to the third times 0.65 to the fourth. And when you put all of that into the calculator, you should get 0.2679. So that is how we get the probability of 0.2679. Now, if you have to do the probability of x is less than 3, then that means what would x be? We would need to find the probability that x equals 2, the probability that x equals 1, and the probability that x equals 0, and we would have to add those up. Okay, so it's a lot of work, but it can be done. And really, if you have a big sheet of paper, it's not a big deal at all. Okay, It's harder to do it on here just because I don't have a lot of room. So remember, first we're going to do the probability of x equals 2. So let's do that one first. So that would be on the top, it's still, n is still 7. And we're going to do 7, now x is 2. So 7 minus 2 factorial over 2 factorial. And then, of course, you're still going to be, p is still 0.35. But this time, instead of it being to the third, we're doing 2. So 0.35 to the 2. This has to be 0.65. And then do n minus x, or what number goes here to add up to 7? Well, you know that would be 5. So if you do that in your calculator, you do 7 times 6 times 5, 7 times 6 times 5, and 5 on the bottom would cancel out, and then you would have 2 times 1. 7 times 6 is 42, divided by 2 is 21. I like to get that part out of the way, and then I can put 21 times 0.35 squared times 0.65 to the 5th. And if you put all of that in your calculator, I believe you get 0.2985. Okay, so I'm going to circle that number. That is just one part. That was for x equals 2. So I'm going to come back in a minute and I'm going to add my 3 circles together. So remember 0.2985. Write it down somewhere. Okay, now I'm going to do the probability that x equals 1. So still 7 factorial, but this time it's 7 minus 1 factorial, and then a 1 factorial, and it's 0.35 to the 1 and 0.65 to the 6, because these have to add up to 7. So 7 times 6, and then 6 on the bottom would cancel out, and 1 factorial was just 1. So we know 7 divided by 1 is 7, times 0.35 to the first, times 0.65 to the 6. Put that in your calculator, and I believe you get 0.1848. We're rounding to the 4th decimal place. So we're going to come back to 0.1848. So I've done the probability of 2, the probability of 1. Now I'm going to erase and do the probability that x equals 0. So we're going to still have 7 on the top, 7 minus 0 factorial, and then 0 factorial, and 0.35 to the 0 and 0.65 to the 7th. Okay, so what that means is 7 factorial over 7 factorial and 0 factorial would be 1. Anything divided by itself is 1, and 0 factorial is 1. So we end up with 1 times 0.35 to the 0 power, which anything to the 0 power is 1. So really we end up with 0.65 to the 7th, which I believe is 0.0490. So now we want the probability that x is less than 3. We take the probability of 2, the probability of 1, and the probability of 0, and we add those 3 probabilities up. So 0.2985, and then 0.1848, and then 0.0490, and I believe if you add those up, you will get 0.5323. And that is how we got that here. Okay, now for the last part, we want the probability that x is greater than or equal to 5. So we would need the probability of 5, the probability of 6, and the probability of 7, because 7 is as high as we can go. So we have 3 little calculations to do. Not really little, but let's look at those. So let's just do the probability of 5. So the probability that x equals 5, still 7 factorial, 7 minus 5 factorial, 5 factorial, 0.35 to the 5th, and 0.65 to the 2nd. So we get, the more you do this, the more, I know you probably don't believe me, but the easier it gets. So here I would cancel these two out, and then 7 times 6 is 42, divided by 2 is 21. So 21 times 0.35 to the fifth times 0.65 to the second. If you put all of that in, you should get 0.0466. That's the probability that x equals 5. Now we have to do the probability that x equals 6. So this time x, we need it to equal 6. So 7 factorial over 7 minus 6 factorial over 6 factorial, 0.35 to the 6th and 0.65 to the first. So 7 times 6 factorial over 6 factorial is, let me move that out of the way, cancels out. And then you get 1 factorial on the bottom, which is just 1. So you end up with 7 times 0.35 to the 6th times 0.65 to the first. That's 7 times 0.35 to the 6th times 0.65 to the first. You end up with 0.0084. We'll add that in a minute. Now the probability that x equals 7. So 7 factorial over 7 minus 7 factorial over 7 factorial is 0.35 to the 7th and 0.65 to the 0. Here you're going to get 0 on the bottom factorial, and that's 1. And then the 7 factorials cancel, so that's just 1 times 0.65 to the 0. That would be 1. So basically you're left with 1 times 1 is 1. So 0.35 to the 7th, which is 0.0006. So now we need to add those up. So we had 0.0466, and we had 0.0084, and we had 0.0006. And if you add them up, you get 0.0556. Okay, that looks terrible. 0.0556. So let's go back to that. The probability that x is greater than or equal to 5, the probability of x equals 5, x equals 6, and x equals 7 added together, and you get 0.0556.